are a few rules to abide by. First, turn off your cameras and please make sure your microphones are muted. That's very important. We don't want to hear any background noise as the speakers are speaking. For the best virtual experience, you should use the speaker view. Turn off. Please mute. Please do so now. Okay. On a laptop, that button is at the top right corner. For an iPad, tap the screen to see the options. To pose questions to the speaker, please use the chat box at the bottom of your screen and make sure they are directed to the speaker and all attendees. I'll be monitoring the chat box and will moderate questions, and please do not ask questions. I mean, I'm not going to ask the speakers to answer your questions during their presentations. We'll wait until after they're presenting before we address questions. And as Nancy said, the program is being recorded and will be posted on the WC website. So without further ado, I'm very pleased to present our very first group conversation entitled Exploring the Collaborative Nature in Printmaking in the Work of Soledad Salame. Salame is a Chilean-born, Baltimore-based artist and director of Soul Print Studios, an experimental space for artists to develop and refine their printmaking skills. As an interdisciplinary artist, she treats work that originates from extensive research of specific environmental and human rights topics. Salamé's work is presented in private and public collections, including the National Gallery of Art, the National Museum of Women in the Arts, the Baltimore Museum of Art, and the University of Essex in the UK. Soledad will be joined in discussion with Dr. Ksenia Nouril and Amy Eva Raehse. Dr. Nouril is the Jensen Bryan Curator at the Print Center, a 105-year-old nonprofit institution in Philadelphia, dedicated to expanding the understanding of photography and printmaking as vital contemporary arts. And the Washington Club supports you 100%. Fabulous mission. At the Print Center, she curates up to 7 exhibitions per year, organizes dozens of public programs, and manages a rigorous publications initiative. Amy is executive director and partner at Goya Contemporary Gallery in Baltimore, which represents and manages the careers of artists in a program focused on post-war and contemporary art in both primary and secondary markets. Curating over 100 exhibitions, Amy has been a juror for numerous competitions and awards, has participated in numerous international fairs, and has placed thousands of works of art in major public, private, and museum collections worldwide. And like many commercial galleries, Goya is open in Baltimore by appointment only, but you can go and see the art up front and personal. So please join me in a warm and virtual welcome to our 3 participants. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much, Beverly and Nancy and the Washington Print Club. I'm going to jump right in and just give you a little sense about what brought us here today. I feel my relationship with Soledad is very much intertwined with my engagement with the Print Center. I saw Soledad speak for the first time when I was interviewing for this job in fall 2018. And I remember hearing her speak and was so struck by her work, and having known that she had exhibited at the Print Center in 2013, she was a winner of a solo exhibition from our 87th annual competition, which, by the way, is currently in its 95th year. So if you don't know about our annual international competition, I do encourage you to check our website. But Soledad exhibited there, and I was just struck. I had this sense that she was this incredible artist, and she's worked with this incredible institution, and it all just sort of fell into place for me. And I'm so happy that I got to learn more about her after that initial meeting. After I started at the Print Center in January 2019, we were in touch virtually and then in person. Remember those days of in-person studio visits. And then I got to meet Amy through Soledad when I was invited to write for her most recent catalog, We the Migrants. And so I think it's, for me, a really beautiful moment to come together with both Soledad and Amy today and talk about Soledad's work. And so I hand it over to Amy to kind of reflect on this moment as well. And then we'll jump right into the PowerPoint.
Well, adding to what you've said, it's certainly our pleasure to be here with all of you this morning, especially in this unprecedented moment in which we are almost certain to impeach a sitting president for a second time. Thank you in advance to Soledad, who I have had the pleasure of working with for nearly 20 years at this point, and to Ksenia, who I was fortunate to meet, as she expressed already, and then work with her on Soledad's last exhibition and the catalog. She actually shared with me an artist who was moving from Philadelphia to Baltimore, and that relationship has been quite fruitful, and I've been able to connect with that artist and start working with him as well. So this relationship between all three of us has been very collaborative for certain. And last and certainly not least, and of course, we want to thank the fabulous Washington Print Club, who, at the risk of sounding obsequious, has been an anchor in DC and in the print community at large. So you're doing great work. You are a great community. And let's turn it on over to Soledad.
Yep, so I'm gonna put up the PowerPoint and we'll get started. I love that Amy mentioned collaborative nature. This is an incredible image of you in your studio in Baltimore. But I really wanted us to, and we'll go back to this, I really wanted us to start at the very beginning, Sol. I was hoping you could take us back in time and talk a little bit about your early years, your foundation, what was the impetus behind your initial art making and how that's blossomed over the recent decades.
My family moved in the early 70s to Venezuela, and I studied there. All my career was done in Caracas, and I had quite an influence at that point. But after I graduated from the Center for Graphic Arts in Venezuela, I was troubled by time, and I felt like I was here, but so many other things were happening, like the man already had gotten to the moon. And what was I doing with a paintbrush in my hand? I couldn't fill up the gap of painting or doing what I was doing and what was happening around me. So my first collaboration was with an astronomer there at the Observatorio Cajigal to study how I would, the way when I am troubled by some subject, I go for it. And so I studied time through the first way of measuring time, that was the sundial. And then I moved on with that to 4 different projects. This one was one of the last ones in the 1980s, about the 3 eras, the sundials, the industrial era, and the digital era. It was just the digital little clocks were just coming out. And so I wanted to incorporate all that together. And of course, you see there the beautiful Avila Mountains in Venezuela. That's such a lush landscape. So yeah,
just a quick little background. You moved from Chile to Venezuela.
Yes.
Correct? Okay.
From Chile to Venezuela, yeah.
And it seems to me very prescient, and I'm glad Amy drew out that clarification, because already the key themes of your practice have been established. You yourself are a migrant. You yourself are immigrating from country to country and proceeded to do so over the ensuing decades. But then you talk about these 3 epochs or three periods, right? The sort of kind of primitive sundials, the industrialization, and then the digital. And then those become the foci of your career moving forward. I think we'll see as we move through these images and as hopefully people follow along with us, these ideas come up again and again. And so I think it's really beautiful. These images are incredible. I love when an artist takes us back to their earliest days. So thank you, Sol, for digging these up from the archive.
Yeah, you not only see the references to time and the passage of time, but you're also looking at you bearing witness to the passage of time in our planet's ecology and that urgency for conservation and safeguarding. And I think, you know, you putting your works out in nature in a site-specific way where it's interacting with the planet behind is very significant in your work moving forward.
Absolutely. Well, let's move forward quite a number of years to 2001. Soledad, this was an epic installation that you did back in your home country in Chile. Could you tell us a little bit more about this? Again, we're looking at installation, we're looking at multimedia. I think that's another theme that I think we all can sort of flag is really critical to your practice. I mean, we're here under the auspices of printmaking, but can you just draw out a little bit what we're looking at, what this project was about?
Well, this museum was built in the late 1800s, and in the early 1900s was inaugurated, and it was called the Palace of Fine Arts, was the Palace of Fine Arts. And we wanted to bring the museum to what really it was, because there were sculptures all over and people and plants, and people would walk along the museum. I'm always being struck by this architecture and this beautiful museum in Chile, in Santiago. And so this exhibition is kind of the culmination of all my years working and influenced by Venezuela, pretty much.
And your brother was an architect, right? So that visual background was part of your upbringing.
My father was an engineer, and his brother was the architect.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, yeah. And so I worked with so many people. This project took like probably several years to get to this point, because we had to study with the weight that was put with what you see on the floor is quartz. And so we had to study how much weight we had to put in each square meter in the museum so that wouldn't cave in. And yeah, I worked with an architect in Chile, and he was my cousin actually. And I worked with so many people, I think more than 30 people, from botanicals to select the plants, their typical plants from the Chilean landscape, and introduce the work that I have been doing from more or less 1997 on. So that compromises a lot of years for me to put in this installation.
So you were using living material to speak about the potential of something dying.
Yes, and I wanted to make it into a labyrinth. The sound when people walked into the labyrinth was very interesting because of the sound of the chords was also a very evoking thing. And underneath we had, so we dealt with the earth, we dealt with the water. The part of the water was underneath the underneath where you see there's an open all the way at the end. No?
Oh no, sorry. I was just checking we didn't have another detail image.
Yeah, no, I didn't. But you can see that in my website. So underneath was the water part. The top was the earth. And so I tried to use all our natural resources to explain what we have, really. And yeah.
But that's a good segue actually to this work, which, as you say, is not from the Chile installation, but yet still continues a lot of the similar themes, bringing up the idea of working with natural materials, bringing natural materials into the gallery space, and really having a more holistic kind of understanding of your relationship to the space. And that's really evocative in our previous example with your response to the museum, but here we have a more discrete work from, you know, around this same kind of period, 1990s, using live plant materials and placing them within the gallery space.
Yeah. That was shown first here in Baltimore, and then it was shown in several museums and was published. And yeah, I started working, but this is typical. This work is totally influenced by my life in Caracas, in Venezuela, pretty much. Because, you know, all the buildings there have plants and you're surrounded by plants. So it was a lot about the architecture and living with the environment, pretty much. Yeah.
So I have a question about that. You've called yourself a site-specific artist before, and here you are saying these works are directly stemming from your experience in Venezuela and Caracas. So in reference to that, and in reference to this work from 2009, which brings us to the United States, and maybe you could talk a little bit about that migration as well. How do you work within your context? You know, what are you looking for as an artist when you're in a place like Baltimore? You moved to Baltimore. What is interesting to you in that environment, and what are you pulling from to create your works?
Okay, so here, yes, I am in part a site-specific artist that works with projects, but this project was commissioned, for instance. This is not a site-specific project. This is more like a tech using digital media and computers and Google Earth to recreate this map of Baltimore and where this project was commissioned by Irene Hoffman from the Contemporary, which used to be the director of the Contemporary Museum. It was about what would happen if the water rises 1 meter and how Baltimore would be affected by it. And in the time that we started looking at all the aerial views that surrounded Baltimore and the Chesapeake Bay, I realized that we are surrounded by so much pollution. And those red cones are the Superfund sites, and the white cones are the yellowish cones, whitish, yellowish, are the top polluters of the area. I remember that there was like this much amount of research done in this project, and I couldn't believe the amount of pollution that's in the air, in the ground, and everywhere. And so I actually got quite scared after this project, because I said to Michael, I don't know why we're living here. We are so surrounded by pollution, and maybe we need to move. Of course, I never moved because I love Baltimore, but it was an eye-opener for us.
It would be difficult to find a space that wasn't surrounded by pollution. And I recall this exhibition really did, if you think of exhibitions as producing knowledge, it really was a trigger for thought and a call to people for action. You, yes, do a lot of research, but you do not ever claim to be a scientist yourself. No. Your work rather takes on the role of opening up the conversation. And and to act as a mirror. And this had a mirrored surface so that when people approached it and it was ceiling to ground, they would see a hint of themselves reflected in this work, which is to say they saw a hint of themselves as the cause or the reason for this pollution, and therefore possibly also the cause for the mitigation of this damage, right?
And so then I think maybe, yeah, site specific, I guess I meant that more metaphorically, or maybe site responsive is a way we can phrase it, that, you know, you've landed in all these different places. You landed in Venezuela from Chile, now you've landed in the US, and you've landed in Baltimore specifically, and immediately you are drawn to react, respond, mirror. I love that word you used, Amy, mirror your place. And raise consciousness, I feel. And for me, printmaking in many ways is about a consciousness raising, a way of disseminating information to people, and, you know, not necessarily claiming it as your own, but having this ability to you know, educate and inform through your work in a very beautiful way.
And we had like 37 people collaborating in this project.
We did.
It was amazing. Everybody would come here and sit and cut little maps and help us construct this 16-foot map. And yeah, it was a very interesting project. I really loved it. Yeah.
Well, this is by no means your only impressive collaborative project. We're moving forward to a few others that are some heavy hitters here with multiple artist collaborations. And so could you, you know, talk a little bit about what we're looking at here, this wonderful series of prints, portfolio of 12 color screen prints called Gulf Distortions.
Yeah.
Before moving on, I would just say that, so your practice, it's always historically vacillated between installation and painting and sculptural forms, video, even non-traditional media, but printmaking, you always return to printmaking. So what in this process of printmaking allows you to impart these urgent yet beautiful messages? And I think this project illustrates that as we come back to printmaking.
Yes. Well, prints for me is where I take my notes. Those are my notebook. I don't do little sketches or notes separate from printing. I really don't. And when I look at a print that I've been working on, I know exactly what I did. I could go back 10 years or 15 years of printing something, and I know exactly how I did that. And because I do not do editions that are large editions, my editions are very small, but the prints are very intricate. They take, you know, as long as producing a painting, pretty much. So that's where is my space, where I think, where I take decisions, where I decide if I wanted to go from there to sculpture or from there to painting and or video or whatever else. And print and photography, I would say, there are my notes. Yeah.
So unpack this series related to that, related to note-taking and prints and photography, because you did travel for this body of work.
We did, yes. I went with Michael, my partner, who's a photographer, and we collaborate in every project that I've been doing since the year 2000, or before that, I would say 94. We went to Louisiana, and we traveled from Venice to Grand Isle after the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. And we wanted to get very close to the water, but the police wouldn't allow us. And so we had the opportunity to talk to people who were the fishermen who were living there. And they put special housing near the water for all of them, and they were all hired by BP to clean the area. But they wouldn't let us, and we couldn't talk. They wouldn't allow us to say really in the news what was happening really. They were paying them, but they were not allowed to talk to us. So they already, the first row is about the marshes. The second row of this installation is about the flooding. The third row is about the shrimp industry. And the fourth row is about the oil companies, and all of them trying to find a space in nature, even nature itself. The idea of naming this work Gulf Distortion, it comes from the distortion of the image, the distortion in nature, and the distortion in the news. Yeah.
And talk
Here's some
care about the distortion of the image, because this imagery was produced really beautifully, but it came about in a somewhat unusual way, which was also related to a project that Irene Hoffman was doing.
Yeah, it was related to a project called Fax that was coming from New York. And in 2009, the museums and the art world was shattering because the stock market went down, galleries closed, and we put the imagery, the TIFF images, through a fax machine, and the fax, and then we work with that. The fax pixelated the image because there was too much noise on the lines. It was done in the St. Francis neighborhood center here. And it's an old building. And because of the noise in the lines, it pixelated. And also the fax couldn't really reproduce exactly the imagery because the TIFF image has too much information for a fax. So that's how these images got pixelated. This was a project that went to the Art Museum of the Americas called Corridor, an exhibition called Corridor, where the artist, me, Joyce Scott, and Bernhard Hildebrand decided, we selected the artist, and Irene Hoffman worked with the artist from Washington, and Laura Roulet worked with the artist from Baltimore. And it was a really wonderful experience to work with Laura and to have met her then. And I think the show was really a good show.
And I should add that this body of work is actually part of the collection of the Baltimore Museum of Art, among other collections. And that what the viewer is not seeing on their screen is these are quite beautiful in how they're created. There's actually cut areas. There's a little hint of silver underneath. There's interference paint that has been used in Soledad's process. So they are really quite beautiful in person.
This edition took me a whole year to do. A whole year. I didn't do anything else except this work. And but from this work, you know, from the number 11 of Gold Distortion that's in the left side, the silos, a whole body of new work came.
Mm-hmm.
It would be this next barcodes. I worked with an architect in Chile again. I collaborated with her, and to with the AutoCAD program, we did the barcodes from the image number 11 of the barcode. So the image number 11 of the barcode, when it got isolated in different through the AutoCAD program, what I was able to create all like 20 different barcodes. And this was a project that we presented with Amy in Miami for at the time of the Miami Art Basel, and it got selected for that.
It was a special project during the Miami Fairs, and it was the theme at that time was interactive works. So what you might see on the ground, and these were actually adhered to the surface of the ground, are these QR codes that people could scan with their phones. And though this is commonplace now, in 2012, 2013, it was still pretty avant-garde to be using that technology.
Yes, and it was a project. This project came because I was feeling that I didn't belong anywhere. I was feeling that we have become, when we cross a border, there is a loss of information of who is crossing that border, because we become like just a QR code. We just become, a barcode. And so I asked different artists, like 5 artists, including me, to work if they would do something about the idea of a barcode, technology, and migration. Those were the 3 points that were so important for me in this project. And so people would walk and they could take the phone and scan the QR code and get to these videos. I took a few clips of the videos, and the rest of the video and the whole video is in my blog of Soul Print Studio. You can go and look at them there. And there were 5 artists who participated on this. Was Pablo Cano, was Joyce Scott, was Michelle Varesco, Fanny Sanin, and me, actually. So
well, let's take a moment and look at these short clips.
Yeah.
My name is Pablo Cano. I was born in Havana, Cuba. My family left the island in 1962. The photographs and mementos that we were able to bring have been very important to my identity. Early on, I decided to become an artist. I loved marionettes as a child, and I decided that I wanted to create my paintings as three-dimensional kinetic sculpture. I like to experiment with found objects, recycled materials that are technologically created, plastic, car parts. I began using cassettes and mixing tapes in a recording studio. Now all these things are done with computers. I thought that one of the 7 wonders of the modern world could be the madams of media, Googleina, Amazona, and Facebooka. These are for me such a phenomenon. Facebooka was created with 2 mirrors on the side of her face that looked like a book. They reflect her, and they reflect the puppeteer. So it's almost like looking at yourself in the mirror. And this kind of mirror reflection is essentially what we are looking for in Facebook, a kind of moment of fame where we become the person that's special. I'm an artist who needs an audience. The like button is wonderful because it gives you a boost of self-esteem and gratification that people like what you're doing or what you're saying. It's a great way to promote, and I don't feel so isolated.
I think, before we go to Joyce Scott's video, I want to say it's very interesting to point out what is retained and what is lost. I think people think about the digital as something very positive, and arguably the digital world and digital capabilities are very positive, and they help us advance, science and medicine and our everyday lives. But as you say, Sol, there are things lost in the digital when you come across a border and they scan your passport and everything is sort of barcoded and so forth and so on. And I think what Pedro Cano brings up is sort of memory as well, the immigration of his family from Cuba. And I wonder, what sorts of parallels one can draw between things gained and lost through technology or the digital realm and things gained and lost through memory and the way the mind works, you know, things we remember, things we retain, and things we kind of forget. And I think in this series, which this is a beautiful detail of one of those prints from your installation in Miami, I think we can really reflect on those parallels between the mind and between memory and then the digital and then the technology as we move forward in this, you know, 21st century. So let's hear from Joyce.
Do 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 da 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 do. Talking about technology. Hi everyone, my name is Joyce Scott. I'm a visual and performing artist here in Baltimore, Maryland. I do a lot of work with beads, glass, and prints at Soul Studio. My ideas about technology is as long as it's in service to me, then I'm happy about it. If I feel overcome by it, or if I feel that it's so incredibly intrusive that it changes my way of life and the culture in which I live, then I get pissed off. Technology is a tricky thing. It can squelch your creativity because it will do it for you.
Great. And here's that image, Sol, of industry that you see cropping up in your work over the years.
Yeah, I did a lot of research. I'm always been fascinated by the industrial era, to be honest. Every time or when we drive to New York and we see on the side of the road all these huge, gigantic steel cities. And I go to Chile and I see it there too in Chile and here in Baltimore and everywhere you go. And they are impressive to me. And at the same time, they're scary. And I wondered what is going to happen with all this? And are these going to be considered our old dinosaurs? And are they going to be abandoned because we move forward with solar cells and windmills and all the new technology things, and we're going to use electric cars. They're already out. And what is going to happen to all this? So it's always been fascinating to me. And this is also part of the same area. And this was a project commissioned by Goya to work with Judy Solotsky in New York. And we work on industrial felt. And at this point, I wanted industrial felt and embroidery. At this point, I wanted to work with the felt in more of a three-dimensional way. I was looking for that. But we decided at the end to work with a little bit of the three-dimensional part, but not completely. Amy, if you want to jump on this.
Yeah, I think it should be said that Judith Solotkin has been a printmaking hero in many ways. She was in 1975, I believe it was, she had founded her solo impressions in New York and the Bronx, and she was the first woman to graduate from Tamarind Institute as a master lithographer. But one of the things she has in her shop, which I think is rather unique for a print atelier, is she has 3 industrial digital embroidery machines. And these computerized 6 needles and embroider through surfaces. And she also does some manual sewing too. But she basically programs the machines to embroider the works based on files that the artist has provided. And so as Ksenia is actually so gloriously showing there with the red marking, is where the areas exist that contain these highlights that come through as the embroidery. But more than the embroidery, I mean, we ran into some challenges with this project. I remember proofing things from the car with you, right? And there was some absorption issues with the ink and the particular thickness of that industrial felt. And I believe Judith had some problems with the needles of the computerized embroidery machines going through such thick felt. But you persevered, and in the end, those challenges actually kind of amplified what you were interested in putting forward to the audience, which is the sculptural beauty of these industrial spaces.
Yeah, it was really wonderful to work with Judith, and she had to call. I called a couple of times, 2 or 3 times, to somebody to come and help her with the machine because it got all messed up with the felt. It was not an easy project. It really wasn't, but it was a great project, really.
And again, Judith is expert, and she has a whole series of hats that she makes. So she is more than adept in her skill base of working with these materials. It was just, this was a difficult thickness of felt to work with.
I hate to move us along, but I am conscious of time, and there's still so much to move forward. And so maybe we could proceed into some of these other prints that are using 3-dimensional materialities and sculptural effects. I think this is another great example from a very different series of yours, Sol, in which you are moving from photography on the right-hand side of the screen, a work by the legendary Emmett Gowan, as inspiration, and translating, transposing, and advancing it through your own eye and through your own work on the left side of the screen in Salt Lake, Utah 2013, which is a print using laser cut and embossing, and as well as sewing, again, creating these kinds of craters into the paper. I don't know if we have another example. No, this is our only example here, but I wanted to kind of flash this on the screen and maybe have us discuss a little bit about your relationship to different materialities in this work, or even, this is a much larger series. Maybe we can move forward into it because there are a few slides after this that relate to it that bring up this idea of dimensionality in printmaking.
Yes, I mean, I think printmaking and sculpture has a lot to do together. They have so much in common. And I usually am moving from printing to sculpture somehow. And I want to, because my work takes me there, or I want to say something different. And in print, I can resolve those issues. This was a project done at the desert of Atacama. And it was called in Alma. And I did 3 or 4 different types of prints, were relief printing, and a thick paper, Fabriano paper, 600 grams of Fabriano paper. And it has to do with silkscreen and relief printing, both. And then it was wonderful. There's a video also about this work that I did at the time that it was edited by Michael. And it's a really nice video of how we are looking at the space, at the earth and the skies. And then it comes to the next question, probably, for the name of the exhibition, Are You Listening? And even though I have so much respect for science and I love science, I believe that we should be listening what is happening around us as just as important. We have to kind of protect the earth, and we have to think about how people are living or how people are suffering, the different disequalities. And I think we need to protect what we have here. And in your essay, for instance, Ksenia, you talk about precarious objects or precarious life. And we are living in a time that is very precarious.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I see, I'm really struck by the texture of this work. And then in installation, they were part of a larger project and a larger exhibition here that used print and sculpture in one. And I think the way in which you draw the viewer into your spaces, into your works, through that dimensionality, through that texture, is another way to kind of have a kind of Brechtian effect, a way of waking people up, of saying, hello, like, are you listening? Are you looking? Like, look a little closer, what you see here on the screen. Oops, sorry, I stopped screen share. Sorry, I meant to annotate these here. These are sculptural elements jutting out from the walls. They are, they are not flat. And so as a viewer, you're approaching them and you are truly struck and awakened by the messages that you are sending people to start to pay attention to our land, to our people, and to the suffering that is happening around us at the hands of industry and rapid digitization and so forth and so on. So a very, very moving work.
And it should be said that the ground, actually, that's all screen printed directly to the gallery walls. So whereas the sculptural element sits proud of the wall and one is drawn in to look at the fine detail and really forced to look and to be present, the whole room was activated by Soledad's printmaking onto the surfaces of the walls.
Right. Right. And that's why I do think the Brechtian kind of metaphor is really poignant for you, Sol, not just in this work, but in all your work. Here's a few more details of that. But this brings us into the kind of meat of your social justice, more recent social justice work. And so here are three images from work you made after the murder of Freddie Gray. So could you tell us, talk a little bit more about how that affected you? You were so very close to that experience.
Well, I was just coming from the Dominican Republic, and I came with some afterthoughts about racial inequality in the Dominican Republic and Haiti, their relationship. And I had the opportunity to go to some of the cane sugar farms and see how people were living and working, their working conditions. And
this was a residency you were invited to.
I was invited to that residency. It was an amazing residency. It was a wonderful project. And when I came home 2 weeks later, this was like 3 blocks from my house. Mm-hmm. And so I took part of it. I went to the protest because it's the social injustice that is committed and the extra force by the police is really unbelievable, and how they treat African-American people in this country. I am shocked, and I had to do this work. I just had to. It was a really, I've never been this political, but I didn't have a choice. I really felt that I didn't have a choice. So I did a whole series of 5 prints, and the edition is of 10, and it was an important project for me. And
it led into another portfolio of prints that you felt compelled to make, even so compelled that you sourced other images from other people who had gone to the Women's March in Washington in 2017 to make this incredible, this is one of my favorite works of yours, on a personal note, from the Women's March. I mean, another very political work for you.
Yeah, this was if you can go back to the Women's March there. Well, they're all the Women's March, but this piece itself is an iconic image. And it was taken by one of the people that I asked, because I couldn't go to the Women's March. I had surgery, but I went to the Baltimore March, and I contributed in that way too. But here, the photographer, Chantal Bouvier, came with so many images. I asked all my friends, please, can you take an image with an important landscape, an important monument, or something that will say where you are. Looking, these four women looking at the Capitol, it makes me think what is happening today with the Capitol.
Mhm.
And what the Capitol represents, and what is happening today. There's, from 2017 to now, this was a very peaceful march compared to what is happening today, and how the Capitol represents all American people here, represent all of us. And
It is a living museum to government. It
yeah,
does represent all of us. It's what unifies us in many ways. Is it is supposed to be our symbol of government.
yeah. And we have had 4 years, barbaric years, I would say. And it was important for me to do this project no matter what. I had to do it too. Yeah, because I mean, the women represent the women's right, the health rights, the environment rights, every right you can imagine. And I really had to put my efforts into this. It was important. And I think it's important that all artists have the opportunity to say, and to, not everybody wants to do it, but I think in some ways we have the possibility to promote and to denounce what is happening around us.
Absolutely. And I see that as one of your pillars in your practice. And I see also, as I'm looking through these images from your very early works to this is your most recent, and which we'll conclude on in a few moments. I think the role of the human, the role of us, the idea of the Anthropocene and the way humanity has actually changed and affected the land and the landscape has increasingly become stronger in your work. The presence even of the body has manifested itself in your work greater and greater and greater. And so this most recent work, I think it becomes really present. And this is the work I had the honor and pleasure of writing about for the catalog, and therefore I'm, particularly familiar with it. And I really feel that you bring people to sort of to task with this work, and you turn to the newspaper, where we all kind of are exposed, what we do, are we wearing masks? Are we not wearing masks? Are we staging coups? Are we not staging coups? All of that plays out on the front page of newspapers, right? What's happening? Who's doing what? And you turn to this, though, several decades ago at the start of 9/11, and many changes that were enacted here in the United States and worldwide regarding, terrorism and the movement of people and the surveillance of people. This was a very important origin moment for this project that you continued for almost 20 years by the time you mounted this show last year, year before, 2019, at Goya Contemporary. And so can you talk a little bit about this work and how you're processing it maybe still?
Well, Michael and I traveled, we traveled to Houston, and from Houston, we went to 3 borders.
And when was this?
This was, oh God, this was in don't ask me. Remember.
Somewhere between 2001 and 2019, right? So not at the very beginning.
Yes, and
I think it was 2017, but I could be wrong.
2017, yes, probably.
Just to give people a sense, because you did start this project in 2011.
Yes, it's 2017, probably was the right time. And we traveled, and a lot of people told us, don't cross the border, it's dangerous. And we decided to go to Laredo, to Nuevo Laredo, and then to other places like, God, 2 other borders. I cannot remember their names. That's awful. Well, whatever. We crossed 3 borders, and we realized how much poverty is in those places, and what they were flourishing towns, they're not flourishing towns anymore. And one of the ideas that I wanted to cross these borders was because I was reading in the newspaper that Trump wanted to send gunboats to the river, and the rivers were dry. There were no gunboats, and I don't think he even knows. And then the idea that all these migrants who are coming to the country, like for instance, in this photograph, I named it Looking at Freedom, you know, because that's what the United States means for a lot of people. And they have been treated like animals in cages, and the abuse is just tremendous. And I feel I'm a migrant, so I've never was received like that anywhere in the world. And I believe that's an abuse of power, abuse of everything, abuse of humankind. And I had to talk about it. But many of the people who are migrating because of environmental conditions. They don't have any more water. They cannot, you know, sustain themselves. And it is important that they move. They have to make a living, you know. And so these pieces, I was taking all this news and trying to collect the most important news from 9/11 to today. And I wanted to use glass because glass is transparent. Glass is a natural material. And, you know, we don't have the transparency that we should have. And whatever it's projected, engraved on the glass and projected on the wall, is also a distortion of the image. So to have some of the pieces before that were embroidered was important because, first of all, it tells you when that happened. I was very careful to make sure that the dates were engraved or printed, and to make sure that because of the distortion of the image, I wanted to have the real image that was published, and it is an appropriation of image. So I embroidered it or collaged in it. And, but that was an important thing because we are going through so much news and so many things every day. There are some things that have to be there and remind us of the precarious conditions of our earth. And
So for clarity, while we're looking at that image, I think it's important as we're talking about fact versus fiction and the distortion of the news, that is a glass element on a metal armature that physically can move from side to side, which actually affects the shadow that is behind it. So, and I'm not sure to the viewer that would be clear just from the image, but that glass provides a shadow that is distorted by the movement of the news. So you're making that that reach or presenting the metaphor of the distortion of news through the materials that you're using and the shadow that they produce upon the wall.
yeah.
And that's etched glass.
And just to move forward, they were complemented in this exhibition with a number of other pieces, including these glass sculptures, which were taken from patterns that Sol had witnessed when in her travels in the Antarctic. And then these silk screens, which I think are the works that Sol was talking about earlier before we started the talk formally, about how she was researching how to print on silk screen, how to develop a viscosity on the silk screen. And so this is an incredible new series of silk screens that are also responding to not the news, but to things you're seeing in your travels, in your research, and in the world around you. These are not on silk, these are on paper, but are equally stunning. And so these complemented those newspaper pieces in your most recent exhibition.
Yes.
And so I am conscious of time, so we are at, how are we doing, Nancy? Do we have a few moments to just go over some studio work?
Sure.
So Sol, I don't know if you want to jump in on a particular image here, but these are some incredible shots of what happens in Sol's studio. And again, I've been lucky enough to go there in person before the pandemic, just Sol and Amy and I, but it is really a lively space where you welcome so many different people, but primarily, as one can see here, many women artists. And so can you just talk briefly about your impetus for the studio and your mission for the studio?
Well, we are an experimental studio, and we discussed the projects with the artists beforehand, and we developed the project with the artist online. It could be online. And then after we develop the project, we have 4 days as a mini residency that the artists come and stays here. Many of them come from out of town. They stay here in the house. And we developed the project in 4 days, but it has been studied before. And I really love to interact with different artists and different projects. It's a challenge, but I really like it. It's a collaboration, and I really enjoy every bit of it. Yeah.
Your practice is so engaged with materials, and even the practice you offer within your studio where you workshop with other artists, it's very hands-on and involved with the exploration of materials. You know, I know that years back you had moved to Italy with the intention of studying conservation, and I can't help but think anybody who's interested in conservation is interested and invested in materials, and this plays out later on as you become a practicing artist. So can you talk a little bit about that connection to materials, that discovery of materials, the invention you always find within exploring new materials?
Well, it really, I come back to your first question is why do I come back to printmaking always? Printmaking really is what decides for me what kind of material I'm going to use afterwards. That's how it is. If I am able to discuss everything I want to through printmaking, I will move forward with that. But if I haven't, I will look for ways to get a new material involved. And I've never been kind of scared of materials. I mean, to be honest with you, I believe if I don't know enough about that material, I can get the help. And so that's why collaborations for me are so important. Yeah, that's how I move on.
Well, there's definitely not been a dearth of material in this talk today. You have a prolific career, Sol, and you do so much on so many different levels as an independent artist, as a collaborative artist, as a studio owner, as a citizen in your community, in this country. I applaud you for wearing so many different hats. And I feel there are probably many questions from the audience, and I want to make sure that we have time for them. So I don't know, Nancy, do you want to chime back in and pose those questions, or how does this move forward?
Beverly will pose the question.
Okay, great.
Well, to be quite honest with you, there aren't a lot of questions, but there are a lot of accolades. I have never read such glowing compliments to the entire team. Fabulous. This is one.
Okay.
One
so
for the
then
record
maybe-
books. One for the record books. But oh,
Maybe one of the questions can be, Sol, you're always affected by the climate of our time. How has COVID crept into your work and into your studio practice?
It has been hard for me, terribly hard, because I love collaborations, and that isolated me for a long time. But still, we worked like with Olita Devane and other artists. We worked with the mask and with the shields, and we did part of it through the internet, and the other part here in the studio at the end. She came to finish what she wanted to finish here, but we did most of the work separate. And yeah, it has been tough. It definitely has been tough for me. Because I'm a very social person. I love people, and most of my work is through collaborations.
And it's curtailed your travel. So are you looking inwards? Are you looking at different communities than previously? Are you looking at maybe the medical community in your work right now?
I am trying to do a piece that really explains how I have felt over all these months, what it has been pretty hard. And I haven't been able to solve it yet, but I'm halfway there. And it started with the silk and trying to transform the silk into paper. And it's kind of anecdotal in some ways, because it talks about water and the importance of water, because we all have to wash our hands constantly. It talks about nature, how nature has revived through the pandemic, how nature is happy at the moment because of what is happening. And I even took care of a bird, and I see amazing different species come so close to us that they never would come close to us. I see in different countries that animals are walking in the streets because there's not noise anywhere and it's quiet, so they think they can come out, what is great. And I see some of the waters in the ocean or in Venice reviving because, we are not polluting 100% anymore, and we don't have the sound, and on and on and on. And the gas, that the boats that spill all this oil in the water, and on and on and on. So I think this has been a good break for nature. It has been also a break for me in some ways, that I had to reinvent myself because I don't have a choice, but hey, I'm used to getting reinvented. So, so I am just working the best I can. And I hope I can go to my next exhibition that's in Chile and in Houston. I'm looking forward
Both
to
which
that.
have been like postponed and pushed to different dates.
Yes.
But you've developed a great resiliency, Sol, I think, through your life, through your travels, your migrations, through your work. And I personally have no doubt that you will maintain that even in the face of this continued pandemic.
Yes.
So
I think things are going to change anyway. I mean, I don't think this planet can sustain itself.
Absolutely.
In the way that we are doing it. And I don't think that we are going to be behaving the same way. I think everything has to change, I think. So this is a wake-up call. It's a wake-up call to the people who eat animals. It's a wake-up call for the environment. It's a wake-up call for the social unrest. It's a wake-up call. That's how I see it.
So on that note, I want to thank you so much for this fabulous presentation. As I said, there are nothing but accolades in the chat box. I think you've answered every question one could possibly have asked. Really, so thorough. It was,
We tried.
and I loved your slide presentation. It was beautifully done.
Thank
Beautiful
you.
slides. I mean, some of the best slides I've ever seen, I have to be honest. And I've seen a
Thank
lot of
Michael, my
talk.
partner.
But as one person said here, wonderful presentation, so great to see these works together and such an informative talk. Thanks to all involved in collaborating together to make this happen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Goodbye.